Hello, I'm Sarah Barth, Executive Director of Semper Virens Fund. Welcome to another version of our Under the Redwoods webinar series in which we talk about the history, science, beauty, and inspiration of redwoods. Semper Virens Fund acknowledges that the redwood forests within which we do our work in the Santa Cruz Mountains were the ancestral home of many indigenous people who cared for these lands for millennia until those people were forcibly removed from those lands. We are grateful today to work with some of their descendants, including the Amamutsan Land Trust and Tribal Band and the Muwekma Ohlone tribe to help restore some of their cultural and traditional relationships with this landscape. Many of you have participated in some of these webinars already, but just a reminder that we are recording it and it will be recast on our website in case you have to miss some of it or you want to share it with others. In addition, you can ask questions through the chat and the Q&A functions at the bottom of your screen, and we'll take as questions as we can during the session, and in some cases, if we don't get to them, we'll try to follow up as well. So please ask your questions. We're sitting with you here today. It's August 2021. And it's really a moment of reflection for Semper Virens and for really everyone either who lives in this region or who cares about this region, because it is the 1 year, it's been 1 year since the CZU Lightning Complex fires that tore through this region. You know, a lot has happened since then. I know Semper Virens has been involved in restoration efforts on thousands of acres that we own. We've supported restoration efforts on public lands that we don't own, but that we care about. Our guest today, I'm sure, will speak a fair bit about some of that work. Yeah, but it's striking to think about the fact that the dual challenges that we still face of wildfires and climate change and the COVID pandemic, if anything, illustrated last year, and I think continue to illustrate how intertwined humanity is with nature and how important nature is to our survival. And when I think about what the last year has taught me, it's really that our human communities survive and thrive when our natural community, and in our region, it's our forests, survive and thrive. So it's a good reminder. And this year we have had a bit of a break, but it's sobering to think about the fact that while we're not facing fire at the moment in our region, and while we're still living with the consequences of it, our sisters and brothers in the Sierra are evacuating Lake Tahoe because they're facing their own catastrophic wildfire. So it's not our region this year. It's another region, but it is just a sobering reminder that wildfire is here to stay. So that can be upsetting or horrifying thought. So I want to, before we move on to our discussion about Big Basin and restoration and recovery there, I thought I'd add in a bit of good news, which is a major project that Semper Virens Fund and our partners have been working on for quite a while, is the restoration of a watershed at the San Vicente Redwoods, which is a large park-sized property that we co-own with the Peninsula Open Space Trust. And we've done numerous projects to help restore the watersheds on that property to make them more hospitable to endangered coho salmon and steelhead trout. And shortly, within the next few weeks, we are going to be removing a centuries-old dam on that property that has been blocking key salmon habitat and degraded the riparian area. So that is something very hopeful. That's a project as it unfolds, we will be sharing with you. So stay tuned for information about that, and a reminder that nature is resilient, and we think those fish they've held on this long, and we think they will come back as we restore their habitat. So speaking of restoration, we're going to talk today about Big Basin and the region writ large, but Big Basin is kind of the epicenter of what we're going to be talking about today. What is happening at Big Basin post-fire? What has state parks been able to do in the last year? How are they imagining things will go forward? Maybe even a little glimpse into whether and when the public will be invited back into Big Basin. And our guest today to speak about it is the Superintendent for the Santa Cruz region, Chris Spoher. He is extraordinary in his understanding of the importance of partnership. He makes public-private partnerships easy, and is a lot of reason I feel very hopeful about the future of Big Basin. Chris has multiple decades of experience working for California state parks and in this particular landscape. And one of the things that's most unique about him is that he was hired and promoted into this senior position overseeing so many of our parklands because of his natural resource management background and expertise, unlike many of his predecessors who were hired because of their law enforcement skills. So it marks a real change, and he's been a bit of an experiment for state parks, and from our standpoint, it's been a great experiment. So with that, let me welcome Chris Spoher to our forum to hear what he has to say about recovery in the region and recovery at Big Basin. Welcome, Chris.
Well, thank you, Sarah, and I'm glad to be here. Let me share my screen. I have a presentation that we can start. Okay. Again, a pleasure to be here and to spend time with everybody today. You know, Sarah mentioned it, but I mean, exactly a year ago, I would have been sitting in the incident command post up in Scotts Valley, mired in smoke and with just kind of a vague idea of you know, everything that had gone on. We were just starting to sort out what had happened up at Big Basin and many other parks and areas from the CZU fire. So of course, we're mindful today that there are other public servants and first responders doing exactly that same thing with the fires they're dealing with. So we send them strength. Today, we will talk about the CZU fire and Big Basin primarily. I think the starting point here will be just a quick summary of the fire, and then go into some of the impacts. I'll try to kind of give you a feel for our initial recovery, and then more in depth into our phase 2 debris removal process, and then a quick update on some of the other park units in the district besides Basin, and a look at our planning process. All right, well, many of you will recognize the fire outline of the CZU fire. You may not have seen a fire progression map. That's what this is. And the colors correspond to each 24-hour period of the fire. So what's highlighted here are the dark green spots. Those were where the lightning strikes occurred on the 16th of August, 2020. Each color represents a 24-hour period. And I'll call your attention to the light green that takes up the most of the screen here. That is the 24-hour period that started the afternoon of the 18th through the 19th of August. So that was a 43,000 acre spread in that 24-hour period. And you'll see Big Basin in the middle of that. Big Basin is a large place. It's 18,000 acres or a bit more. 97% of that park burned over in that 24-hour period. So it gives you kind of a feel for how this fire moved, the kind of the destruction of structures, the impacts to the forest that you'll see in these slides. All that occurred basically in that first 24-hour period where it burned over. All right, well, I know many of you will recognize this, but we had historic structure loss at Big Basin, and nothing was more iconic than the headquarters building. This is prior, obviously, to the fire, and then several days after the fire. You can see on the lower left, that's the auto tree, still fully involved in flame. We lost pretty much all of the buildings in the park. There are a few structures that did not burn, but mostly, and this is well over 100 structures burned in the park. The firefighters that I talked to with firsthand experience that were in that area trying to preserve that structure that first night said that the flames at this spot surrounding this building were 300 and 400 feet tall, which I hope never to see that up close, but that is significant. So needless to say, they could not protect these structures due to the heat intensity. And so we'll be looking at some sites of structures that were lost there. But in addition to the structures, we lost all of the electrical utility, all the water lines, all the sewer lines, all of our communication lines. And that's still the case. The basin has none of its utilities restored at this point. This was the Historic Park Store and Nature Museum. And in the background there, you can see one of the large old growth that succumbed to the fire. The earliest steps that we took besides safely getting into the park was to do a really thorough cultural assessment. And so we cataloged every single site very precisely. There was a lot of aerial drone footage, measurements, all that information was captured. That was one of the initial things that we did in preparation for recovery. This site is the lodge, the old lodge, and this was probably the oldest building in the park. Starting in 1904, this was constructed. You can see in the back there, that is the stone chimney. You know, after we got through doing some of the initial cultural assessments, we had to do a very in-depth structural loss analysis. So for our FEMA reimbursement projects, we had to go through and look at every structure, map them all, take measurements. It's a very intense process, and develop projects around that, in addition to every single trail, every trail bridge. So that process has taken us about a year to complete. And I'm happy to say that today is the day that we turned in, this is our deadline, to turn in every single FEMA project for reimbursement. So that's occurring today, which is good, our final submissions. And along with this, as we were doing that, we worked very closely with Caltrans to create a safe passage into the park on Highway 236. So in that process, the main thing that we were concerned about was hazard tree removal. They took out about 3,300 trees on that entrance road, and that's a lot of trees. Very few of those needed to be redwoods. The redwoods are incredibly resilient. For the most part, those are our large Doug firs. Those are madrones, tan oaks, and live oaks. But it's a vast number, and it took many, many months just to create safe access into the park. And that Caltrans project wrapped up in May of 2021. And about the same time, we were able to embark on the phase 2 debris cleanup. This is a government program. It was countywide and it's sponsored by Cal OES and Cal Recycle. And that project and that program allows for the cleanup of all of the structures that got burned and all of the hazard trees to be removed around those structure sites and in public areas, which for us includes all of our roads. It does not include trails, but includes all of our roads. And that's a massive, massive undertaking in a place that's 18,000 acres that has roads connecting it all the way to the ocean. So we are still within the phase 2 cleanup, but we're nearing the end of that. And this is a massive effort, literally hundreds of people and equipment in the park, working directly with our parks folks to accomplish it. We'll go through some of the details on that. At the same time, Parks is pushing forward, with some temporary replacement structures and then moving toward permanent replacement of critical structures. So the upper left in your screen is the construction of a temporary bridge across Gazos Creek Road. And for those of you familiar with the park, this junctions with the North Escape Road. It is the gateway into the backcountry of Big Basin, and that Gazos Creek Road, of course, takes you all the way to the coast, San Mateo. So on the lower right, you can see the finished bridge. So this is occurring At the same time, we were starting the debris removal, and it gave access to the contractors to most of the park. This is just one bridge. We lost 46 bridges in the park. We lost critical infrastructure like retaining walls. And at the moment, we've done enough assessment and engineering that we should have contracts out in October to replace at least the critical bridges and retaining walls that we'll need to create safe access into the park. So that's progress moving forward there. So this is what the debris removal looks like when it comes to our facilities. Many of you will recognize this as the Campfire Center in Big Basin, a cherished place. It had seating for 500 people. It had a beautiful stage and stage superstructure. That has all been lost. And the cleanup really removes all that material that burned. It takes out layers of soil in 6-inch increments, each time testing for heavy metals. So they take a lift out, test it. If it's clean, they stop. If it's still got heavy metals in it above the thresholds for their criteria, then they take another lift out. So you're seeing a final product here, which is basically a hole in the ground. All that burned material has been removed. And this again, many trucks and equipment and people working basically around the clock in June, July, and into August to get that part done. And I should say at this point, we have removed all of the burned structures in the park. So that part of the process is complete. This is the Nature Museum and Park Store, looking at it from the North Escape Road. So again, complete removal of all the structures. Along with that, they're taking out any trees that were hazardous to that work site. So that occurred, and you can imagine the kind of noise that's going on here. So we've got trucks, we've got huge chippers going on, chainsaws. I mean, this is a major construction project with lots of people around. I would say a quarter mile from this site, as you go down North Escape Road towards the Gazos Creek Bridge area, we had an amazing thing happen this summer, and that is the marbled murrelet, which is an endangered seabird that uses old growth exclusively for nesting habitat, which many of us thought would not return to this site because of the chaos and because of the impacts of the forest. Amazing through all this to see that birds were using the site, and that area about a quarter mile from this exact picture had a successful nest fledge, which was extremely exciting and just brings a lot of hope to the recovery of the forest and the resilience of the wildlife here. So that's a high point. This is the old lodge area. So this is across the street from that last picture. And this was the oldest building in the park, started in 1904. You can see in the back here where my arrow is that same stone fireplace. So during the cultural assessment, there were several items that were deemed to be so culturally significant that we wanted to keep them, even though the rest of the building had been destroyed. And so we are keeping and preserving that as a monument to that phase of the park and the development. I imagine we'll have some signage around that as we go forward. Let's see here. Okay, I think this is the last picture of cleanup, but this is our Big Basin headquarters. So it would have been taken similarly to that first picture where you would have seen the profile of the building. It looks very different in there, I'll say. It takes some getting used to. And you can see the stone steps. Those were also determined to be culturally significant, and so we are preserving those. But the rest of the buildings and the buildings that were adjacent to it, and the public restrooms have all been removed. But I'd call your attention to the background here. And you look at the forest and you look at the trees. We have already taken out a number of hazard trees here to make the site safe to work. There are still a lot of trees in there. And the old growth trees in this area all survived. And you can see the regrowth already significantly along the trunks and the upper branches. And that's a very positive sign. The other thing you can notice in the background is there's the understory trees, those smaller trees underneath the redwoods, are almost all dead. And that's the case across almost the entire 18,000 acres. Understory trees, the above ground portion of them was killed in the fire. So madrones, oaks, tan oaks, they are still alive. They're sprouting from the base of the trees, and that is significant. But that's a lot of dead trees out on the landscape. And so one of the things that we have already started and will continue to work on is a comprehensive forest management strategy. And we are looking at not only the forest at Big Basin, but we're looking into the forest at Butno and to Año Nuevo, looking at it as a whole, and looking at a strategy for management going forward to address the changes that have occurred in the forest, anticipate the new changes. And it will have within it, projects that will probably most likely expand our prescribed burn program. That's one of the tools that we've developed at Big Basin, and we definitely need to expand that. And that, I think, ability to manage the forest into the future is going to depend on that, especially in the face of what we know as climate change. It will also affect the way we look at restructuring the park and the thoughtful placement of infrastructure in the park so that we can successfully manage the park with prescribed fire. So I wanted to make sure that we looked at that. All right, the second part of our phase 2 cleanup is hazard tree removal. We looked at a lot of places where buildings were and got removed, but the vast majority of the work is in trying to make these public places and access points safe, even though we have so many dead trees. And so we had a significant effort to go out and analyze all the trees and make those hazard trees determinations. There are teams that have worked over the entire park. And our staff, our knowledgeable, dedicated, park staff works with them and reviews all these marks. And then we make adjustments to them. Our lens, of course, is public safety, but also the health and the ecology of the forests. And so we have made some adjustments, over the course of this program to benefit the forest health, in our opinion. Despite us, removing the mark on some and arm wrestling over certain trees, so far we've taken out another 21,000 trees across this park, and that's a big number. The vast majority of that are going to be small diameter trees, understory trees that the above ground portion was killed, and then a large number of Douglas firs. So most of those trees have come out. We're at the very tail end of the hazard tree removal. We're anticipating finishing by October 1st. At least the Cal OES portion is going to be finished, and then parks will continue on with maybe another less than 1,000 trees that we're going to take out afterwards. And one of the things we thought was really important and that we've been able to partner with Cal OES on is retaining some of the largest trees that are dead and have to come down, but without having to remove them from the park. This Cal OES Cal Recycle program removes most of this from the park to prevent fire hazard. But in an old growth forest, having large wood on the floor to provide structure and habitat and recycle nutrients is a critical element of forest health. So we are retaining those largest trees across the landscape as part of this program. And then another thing that we've done successfully to mitigate impacts from necessary tree removal is in the old growth, where old growth is adjacent to these cleanup sites and where the old growth was creating hazards for safety of the work and for the public in the future, instead of having to cut those trees down, we have really stressed using arborists to go in and surgically remove and trim those hazardous branches and elements of the tree so that the major tree stem can stay. And I think it's significant that a lot of that work is being paid for directly by donations that came through our partner organizations. And Semper Virens is one that has contributed significantly to this. So that is a huge benefit to the just outpouring of support that we've gotten. Direct donations have paid for that type of work. We're continuing to do that, and we'll continue to use those funds for that type of work going forward. But this is outside the scope of the phase 2 cleanup that Cal is running. So this is us leveraging those donated funds to protect the old growth trees that are there. You can also see on the right side of the screen, incredible regrowth, on these old growth trees. These are old trees, these are 1,500-year-old plus trees. They've been through many fires. This is probably one of the more intense fires, but they are sprouting back significantly, regenerating their tops. Pretty amazing to see that. And then another thing that we're doing, or another issue that we're dealing with, and another way we're trying to reduce impacts to the forest, is you've probably all heard that we still get fires in the fire scar. I've lost count of how many we've had, but it continues. And if you look on the left side of the screen here, where you're looking up from the firefighter all the way to the top of the trees, these are old growth trees that have rekindled and are burning even now. And this is a year later. This is the same fire. This is fire that has not extinguished. It's in the broken off tops of these old growth. So when conditions are right and it's windy and dry, they will rekindle. If you look on the right side, it kind of focuses in on one of those broken tops. You can actually see the flames coming out of the top of that tree. So we're faced with this weekly. We've developed some really pretty impressive skills from our firefighters that can go out. They can rig up these light lines, these light hoses way up in the tops of these trees with sprinklers on them. And we irrigate the tops of the trees. We sit on them, patrol them for 72, maybe 96 hours, making sure that the fire doesn't spread. The alternative to that is that these trees would get cut down in order to put these fires out. So we have prevented many trees from having to be cut down just by this innovative sort of firefighting technique. It's been augmented by, again, fire donations from partner organizations where we've been able to buy water tanks and strategically put water tanks around the park, fill them with water so that we have water to address issues like this. And all of that, again, is preventing these old growth trees from having further impacts or having to cut them down. So significant. Okay. So I'll give you just a quick summary now of a couple other of the parks that had fire impacts. On the left here is a picture I took last week. This is Cascade Ranch, part of Año Nuevo, where we lost several structures on that piece of Año Nuevo. It's on the inland side of Highway 1. And currently the phase 2 cleanup is complete in these units. So all the structures have been cleaned, and the contractors you're seeing there are now reinstalling electrical underground and our water lines. So we're slowly trying to get back up to utility on some of these sites that we can gain access to and start using them again in preparation for replacement of buildings. And then on the right, Butno. Butno burned, most of it burned, but it had much lower intensity fire. So the fire in there didn't cause quite the same damage. The campground didn't burn over. It's not open yet, but that's only because we lost our water source. So as soon as we can get our water source back, we'll be able to open that campground. The structures we lost at Butno were at the Gazos Mountain Camp. We did lose about 30 structures there. You're looking at the one sole standing structure that did not burn. That was one of the cabins there. But the phase 2 cleanup is complete in there. Everything's been removed. The hazard trees have been removed. And Butno, our main push right now is to rebuild a bridge that provides access to the pump house, which also needs to be rebuilt. And then we can replace our water and our electric lines in there to get the campground open. So far, the day use there is open, and we've been able to offer some limited trails. Right, so let's switch over to a little bit of our planning process and just kind of recap where we are. So the initial recovery, we're almost finished that phase, and in October, basically Cal OES turns the park back over to us to finish the last few hazard trees, but all the structures have been cleaned up, and we should have pretty much safe access into the park on Highway 236 and through the main roads. We still don't have trails, any safe trails yet in the park. But because of the whole scale, change to the landscape and the significant infrastructure loss within the park, we have kind of a clean slate when we're thinking about the park, and that's why we're terming this next phase reimagining. We have a unique opportunity to reimagine the first state park, what it can be like in the future for the next 100 years, how it can be a model for parks into the future, facing the kind of challenges with climate change that we know exist, to start with a really inclusive process in planning, and to develop, equitable access into a park so that it can be something as memorable as it has been for everybody going forward. I think these are all opportunities that we have now. So that's an exciting thing. And this graphic kind of gives you an overview, the planning picture. The we are here is at the point where we recognize, because of these wholesale changes to the park, and even though we have a general plan from 2013, we need a new shared public vision for the park. And so that's what we're embarking on. And out of that visioning process, we will then get to a more in-depth park planning process that will then lead to construction of new park facilities. Part of the important thing to think about here is that although the changes to the park are significant, we've already opened Rancho del Oso, that's the coastal portion of the park. And along the way, we're going to have a phased opening of the park as we can, what's feasible, and as we can develop that safe access throughout this process, which will be lengthy. We anticipate being able to invite the public back in limited ways to the park. And so this graphic sort of shows that, and then this the communication with the public going along throughout this period. And part of developing that communication is this new website that we've launched. And this signifies sort of the beginning of this public planning and this engagement period. So on the anniversary of the fire, which was the week of the 16th, I think it was maybe slightly before that. Anyway, we launched this new website, Reimagining Big Basin .com. It's actually .org. Wow, that's a mistake. Sorry about that. It's a .org. We'll get that changed. But I invite you to look at that website. It's really going to be the hub for planning, information, recovery updates, portals for donation, and just all the things that go into this process will be housed in this new site. So that is the first step there. And then this dives down a little deeper into the visioning process, purpose and goals. And right now we are really getting into the idea of creating a toolkit and developing more educational materials for the public so that this engagement process can be meaningful. And there will be webinars, and there will be outreach, and there will be beyond the website, there will be, or through the website, there will be surveys, pop-up events, leading to a vision document. That's that shared public vision for how, well, that document will guide the more specific planning process. That will lead us to a planning document that we're more used to seeing, and then through implementation. And going just a little deeper into each of these, this is the crux of this public outreach, really trying to broadly engage all parts of our community, being very inclusive from the very get-go here, really to understand, how the public would like to see this park and how we can make it the most sustainable, and really a model for parks into the future, given the challenges. We're going to be developing a survey that we anticipate to go out to the public this fall. And then the kind of things that will engage the public are going to be likely in-person workshops, virtual workshops, certainly a series of educational webinars. We're anticipating pop-up events, hopefully with our partners. All of those things, really trying to make sure that we're reaching out to underserved communities broadly across constituents, and really developing a thoughtful vision here that's inclusive, so that we can reestablish the park. So I'll leave you with the presentation, just kind of a vision of when you're walking into the park now. This picture was taken just maybe a week ago. What the forest looks like. There is a lot of hope when you walk in there to see the regeneration of the forest. And although a lot of the structures are gone, the forest is showing real signs of recovery. You're seeing plants that are fire followers that we haven't seen in a long time in certain areas. It's amazing to see 9 out of 10 redwoods recovering, and even the largest of the redwoods that have been through fires many times are recovering. We've lost a few, but it's most of the recognizable trees are still there. And I think I'm finished with this and open for questions.
Thank you, Chris. It's great to hear your thoughts on this and hear what State Parks is up to. I think it is hard to overstate how different things are there now. You mentioned that it's a blank slate. I mean, the forest is still there, but even that is dramatically different. The infrastructure is really pretty much gone for the most part. And, I think that also the larger world has changed, right? We saw it at Big Basin. We're hearing about it again now at Tahoe, that the kinds of fire behavior that's happening is so extreme, so different. So it's really a new day across the board. And at the same time, this country's been talking about having a racial reckoning and talking about equity. And so there's also conversations going on about who's welcome at state parks and how can a state park be welcoming to all. And so there's just a swirl of things that have really changed, even though it wasn't just the fire. The fire, I think, and the destruction it caused creates an opportunity to really talk broadly about a variety of other things that have changed. And so, when I've talked to you, I think you have expressed the likelihood that Big Basin will be managed very differently and will feel very different, not just because of the fire going forward. And I wonder if you agree that it really is something where the park may need to be managed and designed in a way that is very different. And if so, are there any models that you can look to give us a sense for how things might be different? Or are we really in such new territory that it is going to be the new model and there aren't examples that you can look to? I'm just curious how you're thinking about it.
Yeah, well, it is very different, going in there, and then going in as I have multiple times over the last year and seeing these changes incrementally. One of the most striking things was just recently going in after hours, the work that was going on, and how quiet it was in the basin in the middle of summer. It's just a very different feeling, but you really get the sense of what the forest was like prior to development.
Yeah.
And I think thinking about models, I think that there are models. out there. And maybe the closest one that I could bring to this conversation would be things that they've done in parts of Yosemite, where you have beloved monumental areas of big trees that have been heavily impacted over the years. And I think they've done a pretty thoughtful job of finding ways to provide access to the public and at the same time remove some of those impactful structures and reduce congestion and bring more of a sense of the forest and forest elements, prior to development. And I think those are good things to look at.
Yeah.
I think if you look at our 2013 general plan, there was already considerable discussion about removing some facilities out of the basin and looking for other areas to locate them. I think that's going to be something central to this planning process that we're going to do. At the same time, I think you really have to be sensitive to the historic, the values and the history of the place, and you want to honor that. And so that's going to be a challenge, but I think that's doable. I really do think, though, that because this is such a significant park, and there's so much attention on it, and there's so many people that have such emotional connections and generational connections to it, that whatever we do here is going to be significant, and it is an opportunity to do something significant that will mean that this park will be as significant 100 years. If we don't do that, we're probably dooming ourselves. I mean, we know what's coming. We're seeing it all around us. We're seeing the changing environment. And there are ways to look at forest management differently than we have in the past, and certainly expanding things that we know are productive and are sustainable, and have been for 10,000 years or more, with this, intentional burning and using intentional fire in the forest, and doing it in a way that's low intensity. Indigenous people have showed that, for thousands of years, that was a manageable way to look and manage these forests. We really need to incorporate that into our thinking. And it really comes back to not just the forest management of burning, but it comes like, what will we put back in the forest? How will we manage access so that we can successfully use fire in a safe way to manage the forest going forward?
Yeah, and one of the things I've thought a lot about, and you mentioned that that the rebuilding effort needs to be mindful of the history, but that park, although it was wonderful, was not great at going back and telling the history pre-European contact. And so all of that, not only Indigenous knowledge about fire and fire management, but just the presence of those people was not as acknowledged as it might be. So going forward, I think there's an opportunity to expand the history that's acknowledged and referenced at that park in a way that could also be a model for.
I agree. And I think part of our charge here is to be inclusive in the stories that are told.
Yeah.
Something that state parks has a capacity for, interpretation, education, telling stories. Being inclusive in those stories is something that should always be a goal. And I think we have a real opportunity here.
Yeah.
Our tribal partners, the Amamutsin and Mwekma Ohlone, have shown real interest in participating. I think at the earliest stages, that will be important, to have that type of dialogue and interaction while we're thinking about how do we want this park to look, and what should we put back, and how we should do it.
Yeah, and Semper Virens has been trying to share with our supporters through these webinars and other ways our enthusiasm for state parks to be imaginative in thinking about this rebuilding, to honor some of the iconic aspects while also really doing what's right for the forest, doing what's right for the visitors. We'll continue to do that, but I'm curious what it is you would like out of us as a partner organization. What role do you see us playing, both for us as an organization and for our supporters?
So, yeah, there's a lot to be done, but I mean, just early on, the partnership that Semper Virens has provided with direct, fire recovery donations has been awesome. I mentioned it in a few cases, but it goes well beyond that for our initial recovery. Going into this visioning process, using your constituent base to kind of broaden the message of that we want engagement, that there's going to be things like our survey or developing the survey, and also these pop-up events, and just that sort of outreach is, I think you can really amplify that. And then bringing together, underserved communities and partnerships there to this table is going to be important. And then, as a land trust and as one of our oldest partners, have an outstanding record with acquisition. And I think acquisition is out of the box thinking for the park right now. We need to think larger than the current boundaries. And if we're really going to make changes here, we probably need to think about acquiring properties, and maybe non-traditional property, or have some non-traditional values to them, or assets that could help us really be able to expand the opportunities here for relocating perhaps some of the facilities.
Yeah, that's there are many things about this that are exciting to us, but that's one of the most significant, is really getting a chance to think and help state parks think about what should the boundaries of Big Basin look like? What should the boundaries of Butno and Año Nuevo look like? Should they be connected more directly? Are there ways to facilitate forest management across that landscape and across those parks in ways that allow for natural forest function to happen, whether it's fire or hydrology or species migration? And that's an incredible opportunity, and one that state parks in recent years has been more hesitant about, but I'm sensing some new receptivity and openness. And certainly in this particular part of the state park system, there seems to be a recognition that it may be time to expand some of these parks, either for ecological reasons or for visitor serving purposes. So that is a natural niche role for Semper Virens to be playing in supporting this effort.
Yeah, I agree with all that. And I would add that, beyond just parks owning more property, it's the strength of the network that we have in Santa Cruz Mountains. And, working with our close partners, whether or not we own the property, but we have thinking about stewardship and, just taking the example of prescribed fire. If you don't own the property adjacent to you, but you're working with your landowner to facilitate that, and you have some goals, makes it a lot more feasible.
Yeah, absolutely. What, as you think about what's ahead of you, which is a daunting task, and I will say what I often say privately to Chris, which is he can't retire till this project is done. What gives you the most hope? Because it is daunting. I feel daunted by it, but I also feel a great deal of hope, and I'm curious how you think about it, because you're even more in the midst of it than we are at Semper Virens.
It's a tightrope walk between, overwhelmed and then incredibly inspired. And one thing is simply just being in the park and seeing the forest recovering on its own. There were dark moments early on going into the park. There was no color in the park. It felt like most of the trees were not going to make it. It was that tense. That is not the case. The park now is, it's just exploding with growth, and that's very exciting and gives you a lot of hope. The other thing is how many people seem optimistic about participating in thinking about the park in the future, an opportunity. And I don't think you wouldn't get that in certain parks or certain, I don't know, it just doesn't inspire that kind of emotion and willingness to participate. The outpouring of, just help during this initial recovery has been phenomenal. And the number of partners who then, have these connections to, it's just been overwhelming to see how many people have this deep connection. So I do try to focus on those good things.
Yeah.
And not the missing water lines and the, the electric lines that aren't in there yet, and potential landslides this winter if we get a heavy winter. I mean, there's a lot of things that are what ifs, but yeah, we'll get there.
Well, I think it's not talked about very often, but I hope our viewers extract from this conversation that running a park like Big Basin is sort of like running a small city or town, maybe in a remote location, but with many, many visitors. And at the same time, trying to also protect the surrounding nature. And so I hope the public comes to appreciate and understand that, because it's something that until this fire happened, I don't think I fully understood just how much infrastructure there is to make a park like Big Basin visitable. And so this recovery effort is both about rebuilding infrastructure as well as helping the forest to recover.
Yeah, that is, when you have a park that's remote, that's large, that offers overnight accommodations, you start putting together the basic elements of a municipality. So yeah, we have an extensive sewer collection and distribution system, same with water, electrical, and then we have to have those people that can address and maintain those things all the time. So we have residences in the park, or we did. We have full maintenance facilities and tools and all that. That will come out, in the planning process, the kind of the need for that. But I think it's to talk about it because a lot of our visitors don't necessarily know that that's the case. They expect the showers to turn on when they get there, and they expect the lights to turn on, all that, but they don't necessarily understand what it takes in a remote place to make all that happen. So I still think, though, because this park was built over a long period of time with changing technology, now given the improvements in a lot of these things and efficiencies and green building materials and sustainable building practices, I think we have a lot of opportunity to build something that's more sustainable, that's more effective, that is more efficient, and serves the same purpose, hopefully, with less impact on the land when we're done.
Well, I could ask you many more questions, but I think we should open it up to our audience and see what I saw. There was a ton of questions coming over the chat, so my colleague Matt will try to filter some of them and consolidate some of them.
I will try. Chris, thanks for a great presentation, and thanks for everything that you're doing and your team is doing. There are a lot of questions on how to get involved, and from volunteering to participating in research, even to helping support the FEMA application. Is there a one-stop place for people to get involved? Is signing up for an email on reimaginingbigbasin.org a good place to start?
Yes, and thanks for mentioning that. That's probably the first place to start, signing up on that email list. Those emails are going directly to the planning team, and we can respond, directly to that. We have been collecting through, I think it was a different portal, a site that's now been rolled into the new reimaginingbigbasin.org site. We have been developing a list of potential volunteers. Mostly what, the people want to do is help directly in the park, and it hasn't been safe enough to do that, but it will be, and there will be opportunities to do that. But I think the website and that email list is our number one way to connect people eventually with what opportunities we have.
Excellent. Thank you. And there's a lot of ideas coming forth about ways to manage the forest now and in the future, but how are you, what kind of input are you looking at to think about future forest management practices and how they might differ from what you were doing a year ago?
Well, I think, the survey portion of our outreach will be probably the next place where those sorts of ideas can be, where people will have a chance to put those sort of input together that then we can review, and use in the planning process. We're at the very beginning stages of that. There isn't any, we don't have a management plan, pre-built. We're doing the basic field work right now that will inform that. So definitely open to ideas. I think that process will run concurrently. That forest managed planning process will go concurrently with the visioning process, but I think there's a lot of elements that overlap.
Excellent. And the California State Parks Trails Handbook was updated in the last 15 years, and reflects a lot of modern thinking in trail design, multi-user trail system management. How will you think about the trail system as the park is reopened? Is that a good starting place, or will you be incorporating even more new ideas?
It will be the starting point. That is a statewide handbook, and so it informs trail design and maintenance across the state. So that is the starting point. I think, and I'm thinking about certain trails where, like the Redwood Trail, that's sort of the iconic trail to the big named trees, in the headquarters area. Things have changed pretty significantly in there, and I imagine that's going to be the case in many of our trail alignments. So there will have to be some rethinking about trail alignments and how we can maintain trails in this changed forest. But more than that, I think a lot of those trails probably didn't have the kind of level of thought put into their alignments when they were put in, many years ago, as we would now, as far as trying to reduce impacts and be accessible. So there will be, I think, room for rethinking a lot of that. We're going to be pushing very hard to try and get something at least opened in that headquarters area by spring, summer 2022. That's going to be our push to try to get people in there so they can actually see kind of the changes that have gone on.
That's really helpful. That's a question that we got. Finally, I know we're running up on time, but I wanted to return to the planning process, and what kind of weight do you imagine the public input will have in how you and this team reimagine Big Basin?
Well, I think it's going to have significant weight. I think when we talk about a shared public vision, it's not shared just amongst parks people. It's shared amongst the public and us, who have the privilege of managing the park. But it's going to be primarily the public's vision, and I think that's important. I don't want anybody thinking that the park has been figured out already, and that's just window dressing. That's not the case at all. I think if we're really going to make a difference in the future, especially to underserved communities, indigenous communities, I think the opinions that we're getting and the input there will be instrumental in the thinking what this future park is going to be.
Thank you, Chris. We will continue to be in dialogue with you as this goes forward, but we're so grateful, and I've seen many people in the chat expressing their gratitude to you individually for your leadership during this time. It's got to have been incredibly challenging, and I think you've really been a pillar for this community. So thank you for your.
Oh, well, thanks so much for the support and for the opportunity to share that with everybody. Appreciate it.
Okay, well, thanks to all of you for joining us, and we invite you. We have a whole series of webinars coming up, including one that was supposed to have happened previously and had to get canceled with Professor Suzanne Samard, talking about the interconnectedness of trees. And then that will be followed by another webinar later in the month of September with renowned fire ecologist Scott Stevens. And then going forward from that, we will be talking about our dam removal efforts, and that'll be our October webinar. So join us and participate in the public planning process for Big Basin. We will continue to be a resource for you in how you can be part of that. So thank you all.